So, do you think the races with flying are the most banned things by dungeon masters?
Probably. Let us discuss why your dungeon master fears your flying character.
I'm Nerdarchy Ted.
And I'm Nerdarchy Steve. Welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds by nerds.
Well, let's get into this content before it flies away.
So we've been getting more and more flying options in 5e D&D. Right now we have, I believe, 4 races, and 2 of them aren't official yet, but it seems like they're working on it.
So initially we had the Aarakocra, and then the Sword Coast Adventures Guide released the Feral Tiefling. But in the UA, we've got the Fairy and the Owlfolk, and all of these racially have flying.
Now, I feel like through the course of Unearthed Arcana, we had a couple other flyers that never made it into official content. This last group felt very thematic, so I feel like it's definitely going to end up into something. So this means there's more and more options for players to start with a flying character in their actual game. So I think we need to address it. We need to talk about it a little bit. Before we do, though, let's pay some bills and thank our sponsor of this video, Dungeon Fog. It is a great piece of software for mapping your dungeons or maybe even your overland areas that these flying characters will soar above. It's super intuitive, easy to use, and looks fantastic. You can even sign up for a free account. We're going to put a link in the description for you to go check that out.
All right, so when we look at this, we're looking at this as a kind of a problem with the low-level adventures. I know that the Aasimar gets the ability with one of the sub races, gets access to flying later on. There's plenty of ways through classes, spells, and magic items that give you flying. But we're talking about the things that DMs have a problem with is flying right at the get-go, right at level 1.
Yeah, I mean, also too, like, I think people forget that it's not just a problem for the dungeon master. It can be a problem for the players too, because we've seen it in our own games. Just maybe like our understanding of the game and the way we kind of play is like we may tailor things kind of to the players, but sometimes things just happen. Sometimes things just happen, and there can be unintended consequences. We even have some flying horror stories from as players.
All right, so I know this isn't D&D, but all of this could have very well happened in a D&D game. We were playing Mutants and Mastermind. I had a character who was a shapeshifter, and he wound up getting flying. And through the course of play, I'm 60 feet, 100 feet up in the air. Something attacks me, knocks me out of my form. Knocks me unconscious. Well, what happens when you're unconscious in the air? You stop flying, you start falling. So like you hit the ground and you're already into, oh, there's a problem because now you have to make a save because you hit the ground. Now in D&D, there would be no rolling dice. You would just hit the ground, take damage, and now you're a failed death save in. So yeah, that can absolutely be a problem there.
In one of my own adventures, it was in Eberron, and the characters were on top of the lightning rail. And one of them got knocked off the lightning rail. Normally, this would be a very, very bad thing. Fortunately, they're an Aarakocra, so they did not fall to their death or take a ton of damage. They had a different problem. They couldn't fly fast enough to keep up with the train to the lightning rail, right? So it knocked them out of the encounter. It saved them and was a hindrance at the same time. And also, like earlier in that adventure, they're inside the lightning rail cars, and there's not really enough room for an Aarakocra to spread their wings and fly around. So there's all these things that can come up. And like, that's just 2 of them that, like, off the top of our head, that happened in our games. I bet there's a bunch that have happened in your games. Why don't you share them with the rest of the Nerdarchy community down in the comments below?
While you're down there, stop by that middle section and do all the things that make the YouTube happy, like, share, subscribe, even click that notification bell.
Yeah, a quick reminder, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, we drop new videos on the channel. Come back and see what we're talking about. It'll probably involve D&D.
All right, so why is flying such a big problem to so many DMs, Dave?
I feel like DMs have the issue with it because it's going to like overcome challenges and obstacles and make it a lot easier. It's like, they can just fly over the chasm. They don't have to like rack their brain on what they're going to do, how the players are going to circumnavigate that. Like, are they going to throw a rope with a grappling hook? No, they're going to send the fairy over there with the rope and tie it off, and the rest of the players are just going to kind of have to, cross it now. Pit traps are not really going to be much of a problem because the ground falls out, their wings go out, they don't fall. And there's just going to be other problems that the players are going to be able to solve because they have access to flight early on that might have been more challenging for a first level character.
I can definitely see, those things being some issues, but how can it be a problem for the players?
Well, so one thing is like a lot of times adventures will take place in confined spaces, caves, dungeons, the tavern, and maybe there's just not enough room to fly around. And normally, like, okay, so that's not that big a deal. But if that's the main kit of the character, like if you're an Aarakocra, they don't get much else other than flying, right? So, like, that's your main thing. So when that gets hindered or taken away from you, that becomes problematic. If the weather is really inclement, it could ground you. You could be subject to random encounters that the rest of the players aren't going to be because you're flying high above, and you might actually be splitting the party unintentionally, and you're all alone. If you're a low level character and you're flying and you get hit with a sleep spell, well, you're no longer flying, you're now falling. The plus side is when you hit the ground, you're going to be awake. The not so great thing, if it was 20, 30 feet up and you're a first level character, that may drop you to 0 hit points. So that could be problematic, or you just don't have that many hit points. If you get knocked out unconscious in the air, like Ted had mentioned, you will then fall. You're going to hit the ground. Now you're on the ground, you're down, and you already have one failed death save. There's some problems that can arise from having that extra power of flight.
Yeah, that's a one on a death save away from character dead at low levels when you don't have access to things like Revivify and the finances to be able to afford it. So yeah, definitely a problem. Definitely things that you don't want to look at. Highly agree with you that if your entire thing with your races I have flying and you're put in a place where you can't fly, you could be a character who's got claustrophobia because you're used to being able to spread your wings and get into the air, and now you're thrust into this area where you're underground and you can't fly. That could create problems in and of itself as well. And that's just from the role-playing perspective. Mechanically, you're at a disadvantage. Everyone else has something else that they've gotten from their mechanics that you're offset because you've got an ability that you can't use.
Now, what about our games, Ted? How do you feel about these flying characters at first level in your game?
We've talked about this before, that we tailor our games to the players and the characters that are coming to our table. So neither of us really have a problem with flying. We always want to give our players and their characters ways to use their abilities. If a player's like, man, I really wish I could use the dream spell, all right, great. What do we need to do to set something up like this? Oh, I really wish that I've got this ability that I could, use to help uncover this thing. Great, let's make it happen. We're all about shared experiences. We're all about having fun and telling great stories. So we try to incorporate things that are going to make our players and the characters that have those cool abilities a chance to use them. So, yeah, I have no problems with flyers in my game. But if you decide you're going to be a flyer and you get targeted because you're an obvious target, don't come crying to me, and those kind of things have happened. Those abilities where someone's been knocked out or, put to sleep while flying in the air, they have happened and they can happen.
That literally came up in one of the Nerdarchy live chats where one of the GMs was like, yeah, I was playing, we were playing Mines of Phandelver. It was the very first encounter against the goblins, and all the party was hiding except for the Aarakocra character, which was flying, only viable target. So, first round of the first session, the character gets murdered pretty much outright, not because the DM was doing anything particularly jerkish or wrong. It's just like that was the situation that was set up mainly by the character's choices. So that can definitely be a problem.
So, kind of, jumping off of that. So how can players and DMs use flying in fun and story building ways so that it's not listed as a problem, but as something to kind of enhance the game?
So anytime you have a situation where maybe the character's flight could be an asset, but also a hindrance, how can you make that whole experience better for everyone at the table? In the instance when the player decides to, you know, fly away from where the rest of the group is and they run into an aerial encounter, could you do something where they have to, it's a little bit of a chase scene where the player is trying to get away from it and lure it back to the rest of the group so then they can have this encounter together? Or the example of the Eric Croker flies the rope across the chasm, ties it off, then they just kind of wait for the rest of the party to come on over. But then maybe an encounter happens, right? And the Eric Croker now has to fend off the monsters and, kind of hold them off just long enough for the rest of the players to get across the chasm, so that the, whatever they are, goblins, kobolds, orcs, can't just cut the rope and send the rest of the party to their death. So you can give them this like heroic moment in the game to kind of like stand out. Maybe it's just one round that they hold them off and then one player gets across, right? And then the two players, so each round it gets a little bit easier for them, but you can make them sweat a little bit and you can add these cool story moments to the game.
Another thing, and Dave is really good at doing this, is incorporating these fun abilities into encounters. So it's not just, oh, I need to deplete the enemy of their hit points and move on, but there are other things going on within the encounter, within the challenge itself that have to be accomplished. Well, what happens if, while the party is holding off, these attackers that could potentially be limitless, something else has to be achieved. And the only way to do it while these things are happening is through flight, because it's higher up and, these things are coming out of wherever. That makes it fun, that makes it challenging, and incorporates a different level of interactivity. And, oh, thank God we had somebody with flying, otherwise this challenge would not have been successful. And then that also makes sure that the party tries to keep that flyer alive, because it's the only way to succeed, or the easiest way to succeed, I should say, because there should always be more than one way to solve something. And then, when you take in puzzles, you could also have things that, completely outside of combat, where the flying is going to be a big component of solving the puzzle. So that will give these, flying characters this chance to shine of like, hey, I've been kind of stuck in this dungeon, I can't spread my wings. And then you finally open up into this grand chasm, and now we can do all these things and incorporate flying and have the fun that character is really hoping for.
Yeah, I mean, if you think of like in a real recent example of, Falcon and Winter Soldier, like very early in the beginning of that series, there's an aerial sequence, an aerial combat that Sam has as the Falcon, which is super awesome. Like, think about how to do stuff like that in your game, where part of what's going on would be your flying character having to deal with that stuff in support of the characters that are on the ground. You have a lot of fun with it, I believe. So today we talked about flight and flying. We have another video that makes me think of some of our feathered friends, which is D&D Races, Eric Croker, and the Kenku. What class should you play?
And if you'd like to help support Nerdarchy to keep making content like this, why not check us out over on Patreon?
As a thank you, you'll receive monthly 5e content for players and DMs alike, a chance to game with us, and more.
So until next time,
stay
nerdy.